Okay, there's the official announcement that this meeting is being recorded. So Baruchim Habayim, welcome everybody to yet another session of Parsha Plus. You can determine what the balance is today, how much Parsha and how much Plus is in there. As a matter of fact, I kind of decided not to take a specific theme today, but I want to touch on a few interesting tidbits that I found in different commentators from different ages and try to look at some of the relevance of those. So if you have a Chumash with you, either at home or here, Parshat Vayigash begins on page 274 in the Eitz Chaim, or whatever Chumash you might have at home. I'll give you a moment to get those. And it's probably one of the most emotionally laden parshiot of Genesis. I mean, Genesis has plenty of powerful and impactful human dynamic adventures, but this one is particularly powerful. There's this wonderful buildup from last week and from the anticipation of what's going to happen between Joseph and his brothers. And whether or not you're familiar with the story, whether or not you know the ending, I know that every year, although to be honest, I haven't read Vayigash in a few years because Jeff Cooper, since he began learning it, I think about 8 years ago, piece by piece, he now does the whole Parsha. And I haven't read Vayigash, I think, in probably 5 years. But I certainly recall while reading it, the build-up, as I said, from last week is phenomenal. And I love the way that those who decided on where to end and where to begin Parshiot left that to this week. They split it exactly where they did. This anticipation of what's going to happen between Joseph and Judah, who's made a statement at the end of last week's Parsha, and then you're just left hanging until you read it this week. So I want to, as I mentioned, relate to a few of these encounters between the brothers, the father, and see what we can learn about those. I think the first one we'll look at is if you go to page 277 in the Eitz Chaim, so that's chapter 45, verse 14. And again, I'm not necessarily going to be going in any order, just as things occur to me. So we have this verse, it says, Vayipol al tzavrei Binyamin achiv vayefk, uVinyamin bacha al tzavarav, vayanashek et echav vayefk alehem, v'acharechen dibru echav ito. Let me just ask, is there an echo for those at home? Or is the sound okay? Sounds okay. So in English, with that he embraced his brother, this is Joseph, of course, with that he embraced his brother Benjamin around the neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. He kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. Only then were his brothers able to talk to him. So there's an interesting textual element here. First of all, it says, Vayipol al tzavrei Binyamin achiv vayef. With that, he embraced his brother Benjamin around the neck and wept. But the word tzavrei is plural. It doesn't show that in English as often the translation doesn't. It says he wept on the necks of his brother Benjamin. So what does it mean on the necks of his brother? And as you're pondering that, let me just remind you, where else, not too many weeks ago, did we read about somebody weeping, embracing around the neck of somebody else? And if you want to understand where that might be, keep in mind what's happening here. An encounter between brothers who haven't seen each other for a long time. Where else do we read about brothers meeting one another after many years? Jacob and Esau. So, as you're thinking about this idea of a plural neck, I take you back to Parshat Vayishlach, where in chapter 33, verse 4, on page 203 in the Eitz Chaim, you don't have to turn there, you can just listen. It says, Vayarotz Esav likrato, vaychabkehu, vayipol al tzavarav, vayishakehu, vayivku. So when Esav and Jacob meet each other after more than 20 years of not seeing one another, Esav ran to greet him. He embraced him, falling on his neck. Here it's in the singular. He kissed him, and they wept. So what's fascinating here, as we kind of hinted at when we read this Parashah, everything that's done here as part of that encounter is Esav's initiative. Yes, Jacob prepared, sent emissaries to let Esav know that he's on his way. So that's initiating the meeting. But when they actually meet, it's Esav who initiates perhaps the physical encounter, the emotional element of running towards him. It's not, you often see in these cliche music, two lovers running towards one another and meeting in the field and embracing. No, these two brothers don't run towards each other. Esav runs towards Jacob, embraces him, kisses him, and then they wept. The two of them wept. It doesn't say that Jacob embraced Esav. It doesn't say that Jacob kissed him. It just says that they wept after Esav had initiated this. So this idea of not having seen someone for a long time, the description of that encounter in the Bible, particularly in Genesis, is fascinating. The idea that you embrace, you kiss, and you cry. That's the order of emotional expression that occurs when these long separations are ended for whatever reason. So keep in mind, Jacob does not take part in those elements, in two of the elements, embracing and kissing. He only engages in the weeping. Okay, so keep that in mind because we're going to come back to that in a moment. Beth, you had a question.
But it's not appropriate to show emotion. It's a wonderful example.
So you probably didn't hear that comment, but Beth mentioned that. No, not so they can't hear. So Beth mentioned that this is something very unique and maybe a little bit different than the way we view male physical encounter today, at least in a non-homosexual sense, that men embracing, kissing, and weeping, an expression of open emotion is not something that, at least until recently, you might say, is not something that perhaps was acceptable in many societies, and still isn't, I would say, in many societies. And it's rather unique that in the Bible, perhaps, if I'm paraphrasing incorrectly, let me know, Beth, in the Bible, it's rather beautiful and unique that this expression is completely acceptable. There's nothing to say that there's anything wrong or odd about this physical element of the encounter between Jacob and Esav, and later on, of course, in this week's Parashah, between Joseph and Benjamin, and later Joseph and Jacob. So it's a wonderful comment. And we have other examples as well, because in the Bible, when people swear an oath, what do? They put their hand on the thigh. So two men swearing an oath, as we read in many encounters, a hand is placed on the thigh to make that oath valid and legitimate and sustainable. So this touching between men in the Bible is not something out of the ordinary in certain circumstances, of course. And we read, of course, of the wonderful relationship, however we interpret that, between David and Jonathan, whatever that may have been. So it's a well-placed comment, and that's something that maybe we take for granted. We read about this and we don't think of it in our own social settings. How would that look if we were reading that? How would that look in places like, and I won't hesitate to say, how would that look in places like rural Texas? This kind of physical encounter. How do they understand when they read those passages in the Bible? People who come from a very perhaps masochistic, sorry, not masochistic, male-oriented and machismo type of, if this is something that's acceptable, it's something passed over, or it's something that they read about and make an effort to interpret, I don't know, but it'd be an interesting question how this physical encounter might be viewed in places like that without overly making harsh and crass generalizations. All right, so that's this comparison with an earlier encounter of embracing. Let's go back to our Parashah. So I'll return to this idea of the plural necks. What does that plural neck mean? Because it's only on the necks of Benjamin, because when Benjamin embraces Joseph, it's on Joseph's neck in the singular, tzavarav, tzavar shelo. So why this plural? And our rabbis are phenomenal in coming up with such creative and beautiful interpretations. So one of them says, and I'll kind of paraphrase this, it talks about the fact that why al Savrei Binyamin and Ze al Tzavarav on the neck of Joseph, because each of them was weeping over the fact, Benjamin on the neck of Joseph, because sometime in the future, the Mishkan, a place of worship, an acceptable place of worship, would be destroyed. And so he's weeping about that, and I'll come back to what that is in a moment. And Joseph wept on the necks, Savrei Binyamin, because he's weeping over two places or two sanctuaries that are going to be destroyed, which are on the portion of Benjamin. What does that mean, sanctuaries? If you remember, before the temple was built, there was a place called Shiloh, which in the time of Samuel, the prophet, that's where people worshiped before they built the temple. And an acceptable place, Shiloh, where the Mishkan was placed, it was taken away, stolen by the Philistines, and there's all sorts of interesting stories about that in the books of the prophets. But that was a legitimate place of worship until the temple was built in Jerusalem. So that eventually is going to be destroyed or replaced, at least, when the temple is built by Solomon a couple of generations later. So Benjamin is crying about the fact that in Joseph's portion, that Shiloh is in the portion of Joseph of Ephraim, that's going to be replaced or destroyed in the future. Joseph cries on the necks of Benjamin because where was the temple in Jerusalem built? That was in the portion of Benjamin. Jerusalem was in the portion of Benjamin. And both temples, first and second, of course, are going to be destroyed in the future. So Joseph is crying on the temples, the sanctuaries, on the necks of Benjamin to denote the destruction of those two temples sometime in the future. All right, so that may sound a little fantastic and far-fetched, but they come out with a beautiful message about that. And what do they say? They say, why does Benjamin cry about Shiloh in somebody else's portion? And why does Joseph cry about the temple in someone else's portion? Why don't they cry about the sanctuary in their own allotted portion of land? Why are they crying about the others? So the idea that the crying about your own, everybody does that. The unique aspect here is that they're crying about somebody else's and why. Why were those temples destroyed? What do we often attribute, at least to the second temple? Something called sinat chinam, causeless hatred. And they're crying because they're aware of the hatred that existed between the brothers and what has resulted. The destruction of their family dynamic over the course of a generation due to that hatred. And they'd like to believe that they're reuniting and reconciling about that past is something that will be sustainable into the future. And so they cry because they see that it's not. They're able to, at this moment, to look into the future and see that despite the fact that they seem to have resolved their differences and their hatred, it's not the case. It's not going to last very long. And sometime in the future, it's going to come back umpteen-fold and result in a very dramatic catastrophe for the Jewish people. So fascinating interpretation about something, just the use of a plural as opposed to a singular with regards to next. But if you think about it, there has to be some explanation for that. Why would the Torah choose to talk about the double neck of Benjamin as opposed to the single neck of Joseph, Bela? Sure.
They even had the necks of all his brothers around him. They actually were protecting. So although he was singular when presenting himself to Joseph, actually it was the metaphor of having everyone around him or being surrounded, running by the necks of others.
Beautiful, beautiful. Let me just share what Bela said. So perhaps this idea, oops, let me see. perhaps this idea, it doesn't, and I actually mistranslate it. It's not a double neck, it's multiple necks. It just says plural, it doesn't say two. It says the rabbi's interpretation is these two sanctuaries, but Savrei could mean multiple necks. And Bela suggested that perhaps Benjamin, protected and embraced in safety by all his brothers, has all those necks around him. And so when Joseph embraces Benjamin, while he's embracing his brother from the same mother, he's also embracing all his brothers. It's representative as all his brothers, perhaps because the other brothers have shown familial connection by protecting their younger son, at least Judah, and the other ones as well, if in a silent way. Beautiful interpretation. Wonderful. Barbara, you wanted to say something.
I'm wondering if it's surprise around the next, if you're going from one side to the other side. Is that a possibility?
Wonderful. So Barbara suggests that when we talk about crying on someone's neck, we're also crying on their shoulder, and sometimes we move from side to side with cries of regret and remorse, etc. Yeah, fantastic interpretations. Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so let's leave that for a moment, but I want to go to the example. There's one more example of crying on the neck and weeping. So if you go to just a little bit later in the Parashah, we find in just one second. We find that when Yaakov comes down to Egypt with his family, what happens in the encounter between Joseph and Jacob? So if we turn to page 283 in the Eitz Chaim, it's chapter 46, verse 29. So this is actually before they come down to when Joseph goes out to meet them. And he says, Joseph ordered his chariot and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. He presented himself to him, and embracing him around the neck, he wept on his neck a good while. I'll read it in Vayesor Yosef merkavto vayal likrat Yisrael aviv Goshna vayira elav vayipol al tzavarav vayef al tzavarav. And then Yisrael, Jacob, of course, says to Joseph, now I can die, having seen for myself that you are still alive. However, it's Joseph who falls on the neck of Jacob and weeps. We don't read about Jacob falling on Joseph's neck. There doesn't seem to be any mutuality or reciprocity in this exchange of emotion. Doesn't even say that Jacob wept. At least when Jacob didn't fall on Esav's neck and kiss him, at least it says they both wept. Here, only Joseph weeps. So what's that all about? And there's an interesting, I think a little bit far-fetched commentary, and that a number of commentators offer, that when Israel saw Joseph, he wanted to express himself and fall on his neck and weep and kiss him, but he doesn't, because he doesn't want to excessively display that towards a human being. And it says that, he says, Shema Yisrael, v'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, you shall love your God, you shan't overly express your love for even a son. You need to show that even more powerfully to God. So he refrains from doing that. I think there's much more behind that than that convenient explanation. I would say that you might say that Jacob, if you recall, he didn't embrace his brother either. He refrained from embracing his brother Esav when Esav comes to kiss him. And whether it's because at that time he was a bit wary about Esav's intention and those dots on top of the Vayishakehu, and Esav kissed him, is often interpreted because it was a rather skeptical, ingenuine kissing, On the other hand, some commentators say Esav is known for his hatred and his bad acts. And this is the one time where he did express genuine emotion towards his brother. Anyway, however we interpret it, in neither case, whether with his brother Esav or with his father Yisrael, with his son Joseph, does Jacob embrace or kiss. And this place, he doesn't even weep. You might say he'd been weeping for 20 years. He's out of tears. He simply can't cry anymore. Or in an appropriate tone of voice, some father. Yeah. So, but it's fascinating that there is this consistency about Jacob's behavior with regards to his family. And very troubling. And these aren't the only two cases, of course. We know many other examples when Jacob didn't act or say or intervene when he should have. And even here, after not seeing his son for so many years, the Shema notwithstanding, there's still something that Jacob doesn't have the ability, the capacity, the willingness to express himself honestly.
He's accepting God will do it to me.
Okay, Bela suggests that there's something perhaps even bland about Jacob. Not, although I'll just challenge that a little bit. We know that he wrestles with God. He wrestles with that angel. He does things that perhaps show initiative, but with God, you're saying, and perhaps with human beings, he's not the greatest in his dealings with human beings. As a parent, as a father, as a spouse, as a brother. Yeah, okay, you're right. So there are a lot of interesting challenges about how Jacob relates to his children. I would say, maybe to his credit, that he probably just has lost the capacity, being worn out by grief, that he's convinced that he's going to go down to Sheol in grief, having lost his son. And then he uses the same phrase when Benjamin is taken down by the brothers to release Shimon, etc., because Joseph, as the Grand Vizier in Egypt, has demanded that. So he's resolved to this life where positive emotional expression is probably just beyond him at this point. He's so overwhelmed with the grief with which he's lived for so many years that he's not able to express himself. Although, and even here he says, now I can die. I've seen my son. It's not, let me enjoy the last few years of my life. My son is here. Let's do all the things. Let's throw a baseball. We haven't done that in years. Let's do all these things that we've perhaps missed, or use the time, use the time for constructive reconstruction of our relationship. No, he says, all I need to do was see you, and now I can die a satisfied person. So
with those limitations, this behavior that one has to accept. And learn to accept. If you develop more skills. But I find fascinating is the interpretation of the Bible into today's world. It's very different. Interpretation is very different. If someone is studying Torah, no believers, what would they say about that?
So Sorel suggests that we often try to see Jacob as somebody who develops over time, and certainly, the fact that the Bible has his name changed to Israel more than implies that he's taken on a much grander responsibility, not just for his family, not just as the son of Isaac or the father of 13 children or however many others, but as somebody who is going to be the ancestor of a people. and that responsibility that comes with that name Yisrael. But we don't see necessarily that development in terms of his relationship with his family as a parent. And as we mentioned before, there's a real challenge to see when we observe this kind of behavior that there has been growth. Perhaps, and this is often the challenge we see with the patriarchs, possibly more than with the matriarchs, that this idea they have this grand responsibility, often at the expense of the relationships with their families. And we try to find admiration for them within that multitasking mission that they've taken on or that has been imposed upon them. And it's not easy. But I think that's why we can identify them, because, and we say this all the time, because they're not perfect. They're not able to find what we think is an appropriate balance. And even that, if you look at the Bible, is not an appropriate balance. They deal inappropriately, ineffectively, and I would dare say irresponsibly often with regards to their spouses, with their children, with their parents. But that's part of the beauty of the story. If they acted ideally, it would be like a fairy tale ending to this, and it's far from that. It would be like a Hollywood ending as opposed to a European film ending. And that's why these stories are so engaging, because they rend you from one end to the other. How can they act that way? What are they doing? And it goes back and forth. Who's behaving properly? Who's behaving inappropriately? And who's... So Beth said, when we went to school, we weren't necessarily taught to look at the narrative in this way. Fine. So we're looking at it this way now. That's, you often choose where you're going to study and with whom you're going to study, and you find yourself in a group that's able to look at things critically, sometimes inappropriately, but to be able to put any interpretation and commentary and understanding on the table, and then decide and try to find out if that makes sense, if those interpretations are relevant, both in a traditional way, but also in terms of something that's going to be relevant for our understanding of the Bible. And as I constantly challenge my partner with this, the Bible has relevance today if you're going to take the time to look at it through relevant eyes. There's stories here. A lot of the behavior here, as we've said umpteen times, is not different. It's not people acting differently 3,000 years ago. They acted the same as we do today. It's just in a slightly different context, in a different scenario, with slightly different traditions and ways of dealing with family members. But a lot of it's the same. And a lot of the faults and the ineffective and inappropriate behavior is the same as we see today. It's just that today, you're exposed to everything that's going on. Whereas in the past, maybe within your clan, maybe a story would get out. But now everything you do is so visible and disclosed in places where you don't want it to be disclosed, that there's a different approach to it. But the behavior, fortunately or unfortunately, is the same. So let me just try a couple of other elements in the Parashah before we break. Let's take a look at let's go to something we read this morning, as a matter of fact. I mentioned at this morning's minyan that the fact that the Israelites are shepherds, or at least can't really call them Israelites yet, the children of Israel, the clan of Israel is probably a better historic term at this point. They're shepherds, and therefore when they come there, they go to live in the land of Goshen because it's abhorrent to the Egyptians, this whole profession of being shepherds. That's not what they do in Egypt. They live on agriculture. Yes, they have livestock, of course, but that's not a really acceptable or honorable profession. Other people do that, like the clan of Israel or others who have come from abroad. That's not an Egyptian. Let's put it this way. If you told your parents in Egypt, I'm going to be a shepherd, they're not going to sponsor that. It's like being a doctor, there's this cliche about being a doctor, a lawyer, whatever. So being a shepherd was not the kind of profession you want your kids to get involved. You're not going to go to school to learn to be a shepherd. You want to go to school to learn to be a successful agriculturalist. Or better yet, work in the temples, of course, that would be even better. in any case, because of that, they are forced to live in a separate land. And I mentioned this morning that that's really a blessing to the Israelites and to Jacob and his family, because it allows them, in perhaps the safety and isolation of another land, to preserve their cultural and ethnic identity. So the commentators have another comment about this idea of anashim ro'ei tzon. Because it says also in that same verse, and if we go to that verse, that's chapter 46, actually chapter 47, it's the next one, verse 6. It says, the land of Egypt is open before you, settle your father, this is Pharaoh talking to Joseph, settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land, let them stay in the region of Goshen. And if you know any capable men among them, put them in charge of my livestock. So it uses the term v'yeshban anshe chayil, which is a bit of a hint because a chayal is a soldier. And the commentators say they're shepherds. And if you happen to know anybody good there who might be able to be a soldier or an overseer, or put somebody who can be in charge, although here it says specifically over the livestock, shepherds don't make good soldiers, the commentators are saying. And why is that? Because a soldier, according to their description at least, and as we may be perhaps convinced by Hollywood and other cinematic experiences, soldiers need to be harsh, they need to be disciplined, they need to be consistent in their behavior, they need to follow rules. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but there's certain qualities of a soldier, whether you enter the army like that or you become like that after being in the army for a period of time, in order to be an effective soldier. A shepherd is in a sense the opposite, at least according to this commentator, Katav Sofer. A shepherd has to be somebody who demonstrates mercy. You have to be willing to do everything you can to save that one stray sheep that's gone off and gotten stuck somewhere in a ravine or in a thicket or whatever. You have to have a sense of mercy and kindness to be a shepherd. Those are qualities that don't go well with soldiers, at least in a traditional sense. And perhaps even in most armies today, that's probably still the way we view that task. And why is this so important? Because anashim ro'ei tzon, your people, your family, your clan, are shepherds. And why do they emphasize that? Because that's the kind of people we need to be. As Jews, we need to have that element of being shepherds. Certainly our leaders. And if you look at the leaders, the earliest, where do they come from? They're shepherds. Abraham is a shepherd, the patriarchs are all shepherds. King David, all these qualities that we respect can be found in people who take on or have taken on a task where they're allowed to develop kindness and mercy. That's something you need in order to be a good leader. We see in different experiences, many kings, many emperors have come from the ranks. They've been successful soldiers and generals, and they've risen to the task of being king or emperor. But probably with very few exceptions, the qualities that they learn coming up through the military ranks are not necessarily those that make a good leader. Perhaps one exception is Marcus Aurelius, a philosopher, among other things, a very successful general. So there are exceptions to that, but perhaps what our tradition is saying, they don't make the best rulers in a general sense. The best rulers come from a background where you've learned mercy and kindness, as well as discipline and maintaining a sense of order. So it's hard to find that combination. The commentator here gives extremes, shepherds and soldiers, and perhaps something in the middle is also something that answers the question. But this idea that a profession, as mentioned in the Torah, in this context here, you might say, oh, they're shepherds because that's what they did. No, there's a lot more behind it. This idea that shepherds allows them to live in a land where they can maintain their cultural identity. It allows them to develop leaders that are going to be the kind of leaders that we would like to emulate and see as the kind of people we want to lead us. Very, very powerful understanding of this idea of not by chance is being a shepherd, something so highly regarded in the Bible, but often despised or at least abhorrent in the eyes of Egyptians and others. One last thing. When Israel or Jacob and his family go down to Egypt, it talks about the 70 souls, etc. And there's one interesting item that has changed here, one description. And I know, Bela, this is going to ring well with you. If we go to verse 15 in chapter 46, so it gives an accounting. These are the names of the Israelites. It's interesting. Again, the translation is sometimes misleading. Ve'ele shmot b'nei Yisrael. So b'nei Yisrael is the term that we use to describe literally the children of Israel, but becomes the term we use for Israelites in later generations. But here, I think to use the term Israelites, maybe is a little bit idiosyncratic, because they're not really a nation, they're just a clan or a family at this point, but we'll leave that for now. So it gives the lists of all the sons of Jacob, plus their sons. And then towards, in the middle, when it talks about verse 15, Ele b'nei Leah, asher yalda liYaakov b'Padan Aram, vet Dina vito, kol nefesh banav uvnotav 33. So these were the sons of Leah, these were the sons whom Leah bore to Jacob in Padan Aram, in addition to his daughter, Dinah, persons in all, male and female 33. So why is this so interesting? Because it talks here about B'nai Leah, the sons of Leah, and then it talks about Dinah Bito, the daughter of Jacob. It doesn't talk about Leah, the daughter of, Dinah, the daughter of Leah. It says the daughter of Jacob in the word Bito, his daughter. Why? Why all of a sudden is Dinah no longer the daughter of Leah? And I refer you back again to that same Parashah where Esav and Jacob met, when we read about the horrible incident of Dinah in Shechem, and whatever happens between the two of them, whether it's rape, whether it's some type of love relationship, we don't really know. But it talks about, if you look at chapter 35, verse 1, where we read about the incident, it says, chapter 34, verse 1 on page 206, it says, Vatetze Dinah bat Leah, asher yalda liYaakov lirot mivnot haaretz. There, Dinah is the daughter of Leah. Here, she is the daughter of Jacob. So what's happened? Why is at one point in her life, she's the daughter of Leah, and now she's the daughter of Jacob? Why has that changed? So I read a beautiful commentary by Rabbi Shira Stern, who says, she's the daughter of Leah because Leah had hopes for that daughter. She probably wanted another son because that's what would be most admired by Jacob. Not that he didn't have enough sons already, but oops. Sorry, you're still there. Okay. You're gonna fall on the neck at least. So she was the daughter of Leah when she was born because she lived in a world, at least in a tent of women, although in a world of men, because all her siblings were brothers. And she's called the daughter of Leah, according to Rabbi Shira Stern, among other things, because Leah is the one who is really responsible for her. Jacob probably didn't at that point give a lot of attention to a daughter, although it was his only daughter, because the sons were more important, at least according to some commentators. Leah was responsible for her. Leah doesn't do what she's supposed to do because Leah seeks the love of Jacob. And to please Jacob, she wants to bring more sons. Now, again, there's nothing in the Torah that indicates this, but this is based on some midrashim as well. And what happens as a result of Leah's perhaps inattention to her daughter, who was her daughter? She goes off to look for something else. She's not getting the attention she needs at home from the women there. She goes off to see Bivnot Haaretz, to see the daughters of the land. As a daughter here, something doesn't seem right. Let me see what it's like for daughters outside of my family. Let's see if they're treated in a different way. I don't seem to be getting, big paraphrase, I don't seem to be getting the love or the attention that I need. How is it with other families? How are daughters treated elsewhere? And so she goes off and wanders around, and we know what happens. And the brothers What are they concerned about? As we've talked a number of times, they're concerned about their reputation. Are they going to make our daughter a prostitute, a whore in their language? Hachazona yaset achotenu. And it's not because what they're going to do to the daughter, it's how it's going to impact on their reputation. And Jacob's concern is also for his reputation. What's going to happen now that my sons have slaughtered the men in this village? How am I going to be viewed? Is anyone going to trust me anymore? Am I going to have a place in this land? So everybody's concerned about their reputation. And yet, whose reputation has been destroyed? Who is now considered damaged goods? Dinah. The only thing that she might have brought to Jacob in terms of pride was to bring a son, a husband, into the family. But Shechem is not the husband, the son-in-law that Jacob wants. And so the only thing that she had a chance to do that might have been seen with respect and dignity is denied her. And therefore, the responsibility was Leah's back then, but Leah didn't take care of her daughter the way she should have, didn't warn her about what she should avoid and what she should be doing. So why does she become the daughter of Jacob here? So Rabbi Stern suggests that the brothers don't do anything, and Leah doesn't want to have anything to do with her because she's not going to bring Leah any good now that she's damaged goods. But she suggests that Jacob is the one who, despite all, he's the one who protects her, takes her in, and treats her finally with perhaps the kind of love and respect and dignity which was lacking before and which led to her adventures, or at least seeking adventures outside of the home. And so at this point, she becomes or not this point, but after that incident in Parashat Vayishlach, she is now, although it doesn't say there, she's now the daughter of Jacob. She's no longer the daughter of Leah. It's not because Leah's died. It's because Leah kind of absolved herself of responsibility even before, but certainly after this tragic incident with Dinah. So again, and there are many other interpretations about that difference. I'm just suggesting one by Rabbi Stern, but sometimes a tiny change in the text is something that can be so powerful. And it's not by chance. Often we say every letter, every single thing in the text is intentional. And I truly believe that, because anyone who crafts a narrative that's successful or a poem is incredibly intent on choosing every word and the structure of the sentence. And that has all those elements have meaning if you want to understand what that author, what that poet has in mind. And it's the same with the Bible. Every element there has some intent. It's not by chance if they call her here the daughter of Leah, because you have to be the daughter of both. So here we'll say the daughter of Leah, here we'll say the daughter of Jacob. So we kind of balance things out. No, there was a deliberate attempt here to make some kind of comment on Dinah's place in that family and how that changed because of circumstances, as well as because of the way she was initially treated, and according to Rabbi Stern, how she was treated later on by the other parent. So the challenge for us, and as you said before, Beth, is to look at these stories. On the one hand, you want to get a big picture. You want to understand the narrative and its continuity from beginning to end. But at the same time, you need to pay attention to these tiny little elements which can express and explain and comment on so much more often than the big picture. Sometimes you lose these wonderful details by only focusing on the big picture. And sometimes you have to get down to the nitty-gritty details in order to appreciate what's really behind some of these narratives. There's a question here by Anna. How do you know Jacob had only one daughter? We don't. I don't know. How do you know he only had 12 sons? Because those are the only 12 that matter. Dinah is the only one to whom something interesting happened. There are midrashim, there may have been other daughters, there may have been other sons, of course. We don't know. And that's the beauty of any story. It's not just the Bible. Any good novel tells you, I haven't told you everything. There's a lot that I didn't tell you. You got to fill in the gaps from what I've told you. Otherwise, a novel's not a novel. To read something that entails every element of any story is not worth much. And the Bible should be included among that. Bela.
First one is, I understand now.
Yeah, I'll try to put this on volume.
I understand now why when tombstones or people were referred to in an Il Malay Rahim, that kind of thing, that you were the butt of. That makes total sense now, because it was in the context of, she was not the daughter of, she was of Leah, she was the daughter of. So to me, that's like the defining moment when your birth reference is to a Bat Chaim Bat Moshe, and it's only as traditions evolved in maybe the conservative form that we've now added on the mother's name as well. So to me, that was like an opening kind of like, wow, that's probably why we always had just the reference to the father, because the patriarch here was listed as but whatever.
Mhm.
That makes sense to me. The other piece is something you just did today that you are remarkable at doing. When Dina left her family, it was to seek out what other daughters were doing in the land. The blame should not have been on Dina. The blame should have been on her place within that family. Her need to explore. If Leah was so interested in producing children for, sons for Jacob, then Dina had no relevance in that family, and she no longer was protected by her mother. So as a child who needed to find out who she was, that makes total sense. And to be maligned as having gone out into the land to seek out what other daughters were doing, it's presented in a negative way instead of in a positive way. And I think that's what you did today. Your ability to bring out little, to connect the dots is just remarkable. So thank you.
I appreciate that. And I'll just add one more thing. If you notice, when they talk about the names of Jacob's children, every name has an etymology. Every name has something to it. I'll call you this because of this. I'll call you this because I finally had a son. I'll call you this because God has answered my prayers. There's no explanation why Dina's name is Dina's name. Rabbi Stern explains it. Dina comes from Din, judgment. So she says that, is Dina the one being judged? Is Dina the one who's judging others? And there's a wonderful, I suggest you read what Rabbi Stern has to say in general about this. And there's an additional element of this meaning of Dina's name. Is she in a place to judge others who have judged her, etc.? So there's a wonderful explanation about that in itself. But again, the fact that a daughter is born, and it says that very offhandedly. Oh, and a daughter was born named Dina. Like, by the way, there was also a daughter in addition to these sons that were born. But that's part of the patriarchal mentality that we find so prevalent in the Bible. Anyway, I have enjoyed again studying with all of you, and I hope we continue this next week. And those of you who said it would be great to be in the shul to study with everyone, so come out. Don't tell me it would be great. Make it happen. Just come here and join us. I'll be happy if there's nobody online and everybody's here in the shul. That would be a much better dynamic. Anyway, everyone have a wonderful week. We look forward to seeing you on Shabbat and in the coming days. And good and challenging studies wherever you seek it. Shira Stern. Shira Stern.